This recording of F. DeanMcClusky was made at the past president's dinner during the 1980 AECT convention in Denver. This was the last AECT convention that Dean McClusky attended. I had hoped he would be at the Dallas convention in 1982 to present personally the F. Dean and Sybil McClusky Research Awards. However, he died on November 27, 1981. The decision to record Dean McClusky was made hastily, and the results show it. While the recording is reasonably clear, clunking noises can be heard as the microphones are occasionally disturbed. The subject of Mr. McClusky's discussion is the origin of our professional organization. During his presentation, the voices of other past presidents can be heard, asking questions and making comments. You will hear me, Bob Hynek, as I ask the question that starts Dean on his narrative.
Dean, you're going to talk about how this organization got started.
Now if I get too boring, for God's sake, tell me. DVI came into being in 1923 at the Oakland meeting of the NEA. Now the thing that triggered it was Will Hayes' speech. When he was appointed czar of the motion picture industry, the first thing he did was to make a speech to the NEA at its Boston meeting. And at that speech, Will Hayes made a great promise to furnish the visual education program and so on to the resources of the motion picture industry. Now, I wrote 2 reports for Hayes and got to know him very, very well. And he told me that the reason he accepted that job was he hoped to do something for education. Governor Milliken told me the same thing. So did Jason Joy. When Hayes, you want to ask a question?
Who is the last one?
Jason Joy?
Yes.
He was one of Hayes' top publicity men, contact men.
Was Milliken from Michigan?
No, Milliken was from the governor of Maine.
He was with TFC, is that it?
What?
What was he with?
Well, he later came into prominence through teaching film custodian.
TFC.
Now, that's the good thing, is to ask those questions. Will Owen was president of the Chicago Normal School. And believe it or not, yesterday I ate lunch after Jim wangled me a free pass into the exhibit, and 2 fellows came and sat down at our table, and lo and behold, they were from Chicago, what used to be the Normal School. And I told them that their president in those days was the one who really founded this organization, which is true. Because Will Owen took Hayes up on this grandiose feat and appointed a committee. The committee consisted of Judd, Leonard Ayers, Susan Dorsey, superintendent of schools of Los Angeles, Ernest Crandall, head of lectures and visual education, New York City, and one other that I can't remember. Now, Judd immediately got in touch with Hayes and wanted to know how much money was available. And I wish Judd were here to tell you this story. It really was dramatic because Hayes just didn't have any money. This was just one of those things, you know. He just made this gesture. And when he went to his board, which consisted of the presidents of the motion picture producers and distributors, they just turned him down flat. The story, which is not confirmed, but which I got, and I think it was true, was that Hayes took $5,000 out of his own pocket to save face. That $5,000 was divided into 2 parts. Judd wired me at Illinois, I was full-time then, and asked me to make a national survey. This was incidentally right at this time of year, in April. And Ernest Crandall got the 1,500 to survey films in vaults. The idea was quite common at that time that there were films in vaults that would be very, very useful in education. And this could go back to George Cliney's catalog, which was published in 1910. How many of you ever saw a copy of George Cliney's catalog? Well, I gave my copy, which I found out later is the only one still extant, except the one in the Library of Congress. I gave it to the rare book section of UCLA when I left. This idea of films in vaults gave birth to teaching film custodians, nearly 20 years later. So that thread carried through. And Crandall used the money to try to get himself elected superintendent of schools in New York. And that is a story by itself. Judd was very critical of Crandall. Crandall took a compartment, or what was the best thing on the train in those days, the Pullman?
Bedroom.
What?
A bedroom.
No, not a bedroom, bigger.
Apartment. Suite.
I
Well,
mean, the thing up on top side.
no. He took from New York to Oakland, as a member of that committee, the very best accommodations on the train. And Judd was very critical of his spending that money charged to the committee. Well, enough of that. Now, when I went to New York, I was introduced, of course, to Hayes. That was a very dramatic thing. I tell you, folks, I've never in my life experienced anything like it. I get off the elevator. Here's a girl in evening clothes, greets me. I'm ushered to a room where there's overhead chandelier and the finest furnishings, and seated. I'm told that the general will be with us very soon. Now, the general he was Postmaster General. They all called him General. Then through this door comes a 6-footer with wing collar, bow tie, just dressed to perfection. He comes and greets me and says he's so happy I'm there from the NEA, out here. Here comes another one, out there. Here comes another one, out there. And then comes in the general. And he stood under a spotlight at the other end of the room, and believe it or not, put his hand in his coat just like Napoleon. I'm ushered up to him by 2 of these fellows. We shake hands, and there was something about Will Hayes that I liked immediately. And I could see that he, frankly, was just embarrassed beyond description. I said, can we go over and sit down on the couch? He nearly fell on the couch. Then I was ushered to his office, and at one end sat this secretary, just like this. And at the other end, I sat. Well, I didn't do just like that. So just for fun, I said, because Hayes wasn't there yet, I said to the secretary, I'm supposed to meet a Mr. Skinner. She grabbed the phone, and the date was made just like that. And she puts the phone down. Now, this was all done to impress the representative from the National Education Association. George Skinner was Hayes' chairman of the Committee on Cooperation with the Educators. And George Skinner, you were speaking a minute ago about Lee's devotion. George Skinner gave everything he had all his life, his money, everything to this cause. He lived with us in our home 18 months in order to have a place to sleep and a place to eat. The Depression just simply took his complete fortune. His wife lived away alone, Peggy, and George gradually worked his way to the point that had he lived 6 more weeks, about 1937, Thomas J. Watson would have put his money and his entire intellectual staff support into founding George Skinner's great company, which was to be the producing company in the field of visual education. We missed it just by 6 weeks. And we got that message from a man by the name of Hartley that we always saw, direct from Watson, to the effect that with George gone, the deal was off. Now, George Skinner created the Pain Fund Studies. When he lived with us, he had his entire file, and I saw all the correspondence about the Pain Fund Studies. The letters, everything was there. And if we'd only had copiers in those days, boy, what a gold mine he had. Now, this is what I call the saga of George Skinner, because his work has extended clear down, really, to the present time. Before he got into this picture, deeper and deeper, when he lived with us, he was guiding and directing, believe it or not, everything that was happening in the visual education field. I never met a finer man, frankly. I never met a more really intellectually honest man. He was an engineer by training, and I could just go on for hours, but I'm not going to. George Skinner not only had the Pain Fund Studies, he laid down the ground rules. He selected charter to do the studies. Judd, there's quite a story there. Judd at Chicago used to tell us that the research that we graduate students did was important, but the effect of that research on our later lives was what was important. And I tell you this because my research with Freeman brought me into this field, and I met George Skinner. Edgar Dale came into this field because of the research he did with the Pain Fund Studies. I can just cite that as 2 examples of what Judd's general principle was. Now, we come back to DBI. There were 3 organizations. Crandall had the Visual Instruction Association of America. There was the National Academy of Visual Instruction, which was the strongest of the 3. The National Academy was created by Dudley, Wisconsin, mostly, and University Extension people. And I was president of that organization for 2 years. I was also first vice president of the DBI, and I became president of the association in New York. So I said, well, to heck with this, let's put them together. And the Depression came. Now you see, there's finances involved here. And this was in 32. And when the Depression came, it just welled up. We merged the 3 organizations, and DVI became the one big national organization. Now, who was the first president of the merged organizations? Hoban Sr. And-
I'm sorry.
Charles
Hoban
Hoban
Senior.
Sr.
Charles Hoban Senior.
And Hoban Sr. was appointed by William H. Dudley of Wisconsin and myself in the men's room at the press club where the meeting was held. And Dudley, frankly, was the man who said that he wanted to see Hoban come into the picture. The New York crowd were quite upset and almost voted me in as president. And if I hadn't withdrawn, I would have been voted in as the first president of the merge. Because I'd agreed with Dudley that Hoban would be the first president. I was then elected first vice president and served on the board then all through the 30s and into the 40s. When we get to the 40s, I want to just point out one or two things. Skinner arranged with Hayes for the study that I made for Judd's committee in 23 to be replicated. And Hayes paid the freight on that. We hired a company headed by an Austin Lescaborough of Croton-on-Hudson that did this kind of research work. And under my direction, incidentally, Austin was a very active Rotarian, and I was too, and we were very close friends. Austin Lescaborough had been managing editor of Scientific American and published the first cinema handbook published in this country, and was very keen about the field of visual education. In fact, he argued with me that we should go into television. He had the first television set that I ever saw, way back, way back. Now, Hayes, in 32, took that second report, which was published by Mancall, called Visual Instruction, Its Value and Its Needs, and I was the only outsider present. We met in a hotel in New York, and all the presidents of his producing and distributing outfit were there. Hayes sat at the head of the table, and I sat beside him. George Skinner was outside, waiting for the outcome. What did Hayes want? He wanted those companies to put the money they were then spending on visual education into one pot. And what was the result? Absolute turndown. There wasn't one yea vote. This was a terrible blow to Hayes, a terrible blow to Skinner. But in the process of making this report for Hayes, incidentally, Hayes wanted to give me $1,000 and Skinner refused. I wasn't paid a cent for it. In the process of making this report, I went to Washington because Skinner said, we need a secretariat in Washington at the headquarters of DVI. And I talked to Crabtree, who was then the secretary, national secretary. He said, you get the money, you can have the whole top floor. And that was a firm promise. And for years, we had that promise, and it would have been fulfilled. Then we get to the time when Mark May gets into the picture. Teaching film custodians is created. They make so much money because they're nonprofit that they don't know what to do with it. They donated to the NEA the money that created the paid secretariat for DVI in Washington. So this thread, now note, this starts with Hayes, George Skinner, Judd, and goes right straight through to that culmination. Well, when it became known that they were going to pay a secretary and give him a staff, I guess the audiovisual people just went cuckoo, because Lyle Ashby told me that he never in his life saw such a mess. And Vernon Dameron was appointed because nobody knew him, nobody knew what he'd done, and he was totally outside the field.
We still do that.
And Vernon Dameron was still secretary when I came into the picture as president. Now, Corey was president, elected for 2 years. I was telling Carolyn about this, and that's what triggered this, what I'm telling you. They revised the Constitution. They used to revise the Constitution every other year. And all of
That was before Burgess.
and they revised the Constitution, and the election was to be held in this manner. National vote. We had a couple of thousand members then, and the highest number receiving the vote was to be president. Second highest, first vice president, third highest, second vice president, so on. And it came out Corey, McClusky, Noel. And Vernon told me that Corey and McClusky ran way ahead of the field. That's just a side. That's how that hierarchy was set up. We were to serve 2 years, each officer. And Corey resigned at the end of the first year, and that's how I became president. I came in the back door. I was never really, in a sense, elected to the presidency. And then I nominated at the state meeting in California, because this was required under the new Constitution, that the nominees for officers be nominated by regional groups. And I nominated Noel, and that's how he became president.
Are there other people who were early presidents that you wanted him to talk about?
I knew them all. I'm going to brag here a little, but because of the Skinner connection and the other interlocking situations, and unfortunately because, and I say this frankly, because I had a PhD degree and nobody else did, this is really a big factor in this whole picture. I kind of ran the show all through that period. I was the one who persuaded Grace Fisher Ramsey to come in. I was the one who persuaded Nelson Green to take it. And it wasn't until the Homans and Dale came into the picture that that situation was broken. Maybe for the better, I guess it was. It wasn't that I was ambitious. Now, don't get that idea. It's just that's the way the ball bounced.
Those are the facts.
Those are the facts.
And one of the interesting things I remember so well, one of the highlights of my career was the opportunity of seeing Dean in his garage with the greatest collection of periodicals in the world. He had, and if you don't believe it, he has every single periodical from zilch to zilch, right?
That's right.
What'd you do with your collection?
I gave my collection to Paul Sattler. Paul came over from SC. Incidentally, he took courses both at UCLA and SC, and said that Finn had sent him over, or suggested that he come over and talk to me about his thesis. And his thesis was a history of audiovisual instruction. And he wrote a tremendous thing, 1,400 typewritten pages. And Paul came in. One?
3 volumes.
3 volumes, yeah.
50/50.
then the question, getting it published came in. And I got a contract with him for W.C. Brown, who was publishing my stuff, and Paul never could get the last chapter written. And
How many pages I can understand?
in fact, I wrote
It kept eluding.
I wrote the second chapter for him, and 10 years later, now he really wrote and rewrote and rewrote. That thing was just simply honed down. He got this contract with McGraw-Hill, and he was abroad at the time, and he got the notice from McGraw-Hill that they'd accepted it. He, I think, wired me or something. He was so excited. And it was really a great feather in his cap. Now, the book has many errors, and we could, it's like any work of that kind. He has asked McGraw-Hill about a second edition, but so far that hasn't come. I might say that so many people have started in this field, done notable work, and then somehow or other get away from it. My brother is an example. My brother worked on the Freeman Group, and his study on the contents of 100 films, which is the last chapter in the Freeman book, was replicated entirely by a graduate student in Harvard 20 years later, and there had not been one change in the contents of films. The films had not, the producers had paid absolutely no attention to what we found in that study. The films were made up of still pictures, over 50% just still pictures. Did you know that Eastman Teaching Films, their entire library was made up with stuff that they bought here and there and put together? It was one of the worst examples of filmmaking. Oh, brother.
I can remember those.
Now you take Yale University. I was right in the middle of that thing, and those boys really tried hard. They brought the Yale faculty into it. They made pictures that were so dull and dry, too long. They would give the introduction, the teacher would, and just when they get to the climax, the bell would ring, and that was in. You see, the pictures were too long. And those boys, they just bled over trying to recoup some money out of that enterprise. It was, of course, tied up with the Yale Chronicles of America, which was a big, 5-foot shelf deal. And, it just was pitiful what happened. The big thing that I've learned, ladies and gentlemen, as I look back, and this was true because later we tried to answer George Skinner's question that he asked me the day I met him, to go back to the gal at the desk, making the date. When I went over to see George Skinner and met him for the first time, he wanted to know what films to make. He said, if you can tell me the 100 films to make, we will start breaking ground tomorrow. And Jason Joy told me he had $1 million in the bank right then. And that was a firm statement. But I found out, I told him, I said, it'd take 2 years to answer your question. And I was frankly a babe in the woods. Good Lord, what a statement, 2 years. I just took a figure out of the air. He tried to get the United States Commissioner of Education, John Taggart, to get the answer. And I went down to Washington from New York. That was my first stop, and visited Taggart. And he told me about this businessman in New York that wanted this questionnaire sent out. They sent it out to 10,000 school superintendents. They got over 800 replies, and the best they could get out of that entire cross-section of American school superintendents was a film in science. I read every single reply and tabulated them, made it part of my study for judge committee. You see, school people, frankly, don't have the slightest idea what it is to make a film. And I didn't find that out myself until we had the Mark May Commission, which Wallace Atwood, the president of Clark University, and myself had received a grant from Rathman of RKO to make a series of pictures on geography. I might say to you some things like this. The president of the University of Wisconsin came to see Skinner in New York, and I met with him, we all met with him, and he said, I will resign any moment you fellas say it's okay to go ahead. Studebaker, Commissioner of Education, told us the same thing. But Studebaker had an idea. He said the easiest thing to sell a school board would be a complete course of films. Dean Russell of Columbia Teachers College told us time and again, what we need is a complete course. So when the May Commission was formed, frankly, gentlemen, I made the decision that formed that commission. He put in a request. You see, Peter Rathman was president of RKO. He had been picked by George Skinner, and I met him long before he even dreamed of being president of RKO. And Skinner was a very astute fellow when it came to picking people. And Rathman was the second chairman of Will Hayes' committee on cooperation with the educators. And Rathman, I used to go in town and I'd give him a ring, and if he was free, he'd say, Dean, come up, we'll have lunch at the University Club. And this is one of those days. He said, come up, we'll have lunch at the University Club. He showed me this letter from one Mark May up at Yale, who wanted about $250,000 and to do research. And Rathman said to me, he said, Dean, what'll I do? He said, Hayes has appointed me again on this committee, and I'm supposed to answer this letter. I said, Peter, if Mark May and his group can answer George Skinner's question, what films should be made, I said it would be worth it. I was in Peter's office about 10 days, 2 weeks later. He lifted his blotter and pulled out 10 checks. He had each one of them $12,000. And he had already sandbagged the producers for their share. And that's how the Mark May Commission started.
Dean, what year was that?
That was about the time Dameron was appointed, around
46.
1946. Yeah.
Oh, it was before that.
What?
It was before that, Dean.
Yes, it was. It was earlier than.
Mark May came to see me in my first year at Indiana University, which was 1940.
Yeah.
And Roger Albright was with him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. May I make one or two just kind of warning comments? I've been greatly disturbed by the fact that an institution like UCLA, when I left, they did appoint Lumsdaine, but when Lumsdaine left after 2 years, what I did there just completely is lost. And I can tell you folks that most of that loss came right within the School of Education. My first meeting at UCLA with the faculty of the School of Education, one of the professors looked me in the eye and said, "There's no reason for you to be here. I know all there is to know about visual education." And all she knew, because she ran the practice school, was to get the sons and daughters of great stars in Hollywood to bring down the 35 millimeter projector and show a film. When we built the new elementary school, I had to fight like a tiger to even get darkening drapes for that building. We built a brand new school of business administration, and I was chairman of the campus committee on audiovisual, and the President, Rule 13 said that no building should be built or altered without the approval of our committee. I told that building committee and the architects and engineers that they should darken the windows in that building. They said fine, and they approved it. I walked out the door just feeling, as soon as I got out the door, blue pencil. Then, when the building was built, the committee for that building came to me and asked me, and I had no money in my committee, to darken 17 windows. That happened on 3 buildings on that campus. And when I published the bibliography, you know who I wrote that for? Chancellor Allen. I sent him a copy. He wrote me a personal note. He said, "I didn't know that there was this much literature in the field of visual education. These people just don't know." The head of our training department came over to my office to buy a recording machine for the elementary school, practice school, and bragged about the fact that he had not been in a professional movie for 10 years. He didn't know one end of a machine from a, and that's the kind of thing.
Very good one.
We can,
Of course, you fellows can all duplicate that. What?
May I, as a brash newcomer
Yeah.
to this field, make an inquiry and a suggestion?
Yeah,
May I?
yeah.
It has often occurred to me that these functions of past president are very remarkable experiences. But the experience seems to terminate with the disbanding of the meeting, and all that it has led to seems to disappear. Now, I make this suggestion, and Charlie, will you please critique it? And Wes, will you please critique it? Because it has to do with you people, you as a representative of the Archive Committee, Charlie, and Wes, you as the person responsible for husbanding the resources, past, present, and future of this association. That this group of past presidents resolve to urge the present officialdom, headed by our president, to make it possible to record in our own selected media formats the gist of the years 1923 to 1943, to then be deposited with the archives so that we have some orderly resume of the growth and development of this association, which at 1943 became rather systematically documented, but before that time is apt to escape unless we use our own procedures and techniques to preserve it.
Wes, before you start, may I offer a suggestion?
No.
This is this kind of interchange is memorable, and it's the first time we've ever brought this thing out for this sort of thing.
Let's don't yield to the temptation.
I think back over other sessions, dinners that we've had, and look back, and unfortunately the time Floyd Brooker was here, we didn't record anything, and
But he was doing matchsticks with his legs crossed.
and who is the
Julian Bryant.
Julian Bryant visited with us, and I'd like to, and this may be completely out of order, and if so, put me down, please. I'd like to suggest next year we invite someone else of an equal caliber to meet with us who is not a past president. I'm saying this for the group's consideration, and who really has given a great deal to the association, and whatever else I could say is not necessary, but I'd like to invite Dick Lewis to meet with this group and share some of his remembrances and activities of the association. I just offer it, and do as you wish.
It was Walt Whittick who made the suggestion that future past presidents' dinners should be recorded. And it was Jerry Kemp who suggested that the next guest should be Dick Lewis. Unfortunately, Dick Lewis died before this could be carried out. This is the end of this recording.